As we start to move forward with three-dimensional construction documents, that's going to be driven by the fact that we don't have enough workers, right? Which means that we're going to have to do a lot more with a lot less, which means that the communication from the design intent to the constructors is going to need to be helped so that there's fewer mistakes.
Welcome to the BIM Heroes podcast. On this podcast, we will be discussing the state of the metaverse. How's it going, Paul?
Very good, Cody. Pleasure to be here.
We typically start out the episode each week and we talk about you. And so I thought we would start out with introductions.
Sure. Well, this could take up the entire podcast, actually, because I've been around in the industry much longer than I ever thought. But yeah, I started out as a builder, became an architect. But while I was going through school, I did this thing called work study. So when you become a licensed architect, you need to go through a series of intern hours in order to gain experience in that type of thing. But when I was going to school, they offered me that I could start whittling down those hours by doing real work one semester. So go out to the workforce and then come back to school. So it took me a little bit longer, but I was going to school in New York City, and I had the opportunity to join any of the large architectural firms, but I didn't want to do bathroom details. So what I did was I got an offer by IBM, who at the time was like the only computer, manufacturer, uh, leading manufacturer in the world. It's like if you didn't use IBM equipment, you really weren't running. So I became the designer of their trade show booths. So Comdex, PC Expo, these big conferences for computers, and IBM is the juggernaut, and I was their designer. So we got to learn all about computers, the hardware, ripping it apart, putting it back together again, matching it up with software. And of course, young software companies wanted to be on IBM equipment, so it looked like that they were enabling business, right? So these startups called Microsoft, Adobe, Corel, all these guys, they worked directly with me because I needed to showcase their product the best in front of all these hundreds of thousands of people at these trade shows. So what was also cool was learning about networking. How do you make all this stuff work? So from mini mainframes to PCs, I was the guy. And what I learned was that IBM was an assembler. They really weren't a manufacturer because they would take other equipment manufacturers or OEMs components, and then they would put their brand around it as a PC. And I went, well, isn't that a general contractor? Because general contractors don't own things like door companies or window companies or plumbing companies. They're OEM. So then that's when the bright light came off, and that's what's been driving my career still to this day is why can't a building become a computer? Why do we need to have a separate thing? Why don't we build it into the walls, floors, and ceilings of the spaces that we live, work, and play in? And then wouldn't it be really cool if we could then link all those together, like the Internet of Buildings? So that's been my driving force, Cody. That's a little bit about me, but now I run a company that does large scale real estate developments called Smart Cities. And this is where the advent of tech is really starting to interface with the physicality of urban experiences. That means that I need new interfaces. I need new ways of expressing not only the design intent for how do you construct a city, but how do you play and live and work in those urban environments in very unique ways. So that's where the world of virtual worlds and digital twins, and eventually when it arrives, the metaverse can start to interact with these new urban experiences. So, yeah, it's been a wonderful ride, and, I'll definitely be able to interject some really fun stories because I look back on what I've done, and I'm going, "Wait a second, I sound like Forrest Gump." I'm always at, like, the right place at the right time, but I'm not planning it, it just happens. So I usually chalk it up to them Irish and unlucky.
There you go. I like that. And then just a little bit of the history of the company that you're a part of, the Digi Group.
Yeah, so I started the Digi Group as a consultancy way back in the day. I was really good at CAD. I became one of the leaders, but inadvertently, of this movement called Building Information Modeling or BIM. I was recruited into helping a startup out of Cambridge, Massachusetts called Charles River Software. And my job was to get my friends who were design tech leaders, CIOs, CTOs of these large architectural firms to buy one seat. Just give me a chance, right? And so literally on my hands and knees saying, please, please, please. And a lot of these people did. And they started to get more and more sales. And so we had about $800,000 worth of sales when Autodesk came by and bought Revit, that we renamed ourselves, uh, into um, into a $133 million purchase. That was a really good day. I said, "Screw architecture, I'm going to be in software." Right. But at the end of the day, my company then really took off because here you are, one of the leaders of this new movement, and people were interested. So I became a consultant advisor to a lot of different design firms, both engineers, architects, that type of thing. A little known fact, Arab, the world famous engineering firm, I did their first website. So all this stuff was so new. And I wrote this book called Cyber Places, published by RS Means, the big publisher of construction cost data. And the Cyber Places was about using the internet for design, construction, and facility management. And it was a little bit ahead of its time, but it still holds true to this day. But that's where we started to take an approach of understanding how we can start to take the old world, the traditional way of procuring projects and building the built environment, and taking that next step. Meaning, could we take a virtual digital asset representation, especially when it's in 3D, like in Revit, and do something else with it? So I wanted to really explore how to do it better, right, from the way that we usually do it. And a friend of mine in San Francisco was advising a studio called Planet Nine Studios that was helping to create the 3D model of the new San Francisco Giants baseball team's stadium. They were moving from Candlestick Park, which is out near the airport, to downtown. And they wanted to explain to the public, to stakeholders like the mayor and city council, what this thing was going to look like. But they didn't want to spend a lot of money on engineering type of software, like, 3D Max or things that you could fly through. So I remembered that I had a friend who was a software developer that was exploring not just HTML, which is a two-dimensional view of graphics on a web browser, but VRML, a 3D version of this. So we were advising Plan 9 Studios of how to do that because web browsers were free, so no cost, right? And they were able to do it. So we called it the Metaverse, and I published the screenshots in Netscape browser that was in this book called Cyber Places. So there's been a lot of people for a very long time that have been part of this, and I've been very fortunate to have the company operational since 1994. So 30 years, which is kind of cool. And we've also been able to expand out what we do. We do some light consulting and advisory, not as much as we used to, but we started to then produce ways of showcasing large scale models in 3D that were beyond just the single building view or maybe multiple buildings, but maybe only five or six buildings in a piece of engineering software like Revit. Right. And so I leveraged it with a friend of mine named Remy Arnaud. He had just done uh, some uh, some time after being acquired by Google. His technology became Google Earth. And he and I were, collaborating together, saying how disappointed he was that Google kept on creating all these images, but then you'd have to attach data to it. He goes, "That's backwards. The data should drive the geometry." So we created our own tool. It was called Orbi, and I started to showcase it. And my friends at IBM, yet again, came by because they and were looking at the technology because they said, "We have a new program called the Smarter Planet, Smarter City, Smarter Building Program. And we think that your technology would be fantastic with it." So I did not sell it. And I decided to get back into the physical world of designing buildings, designing cities, and actually building these things from scratch. And I moved to China, and we were responsible for their smart cities. Suddenly, the White House saw it and said, "You're doing what?" So my little boutique company now is working in communist China, helping them with their urban environments using American goods, products, and services. So all of a sudden, the State Department and the Commerce Department going, you're our hero. Because now we're bringing stuff, so it's like foreign direct investment-ish type of stuff. You're exploring with American innovation, you're maturing it, and then you're coming back into the American market. So that boomerang effect was very, very good for diplomacy and all this other stuff. So here I am finding myself hanging out at the White House and going to, Beijing and just meeting all these people where, I'm sitting in these meetings sometimes coding and I'm going, "This is way above my pay grade." Like, I'm expecting some person to tap my shoulder and go, "Son, you need to come out." But it worked out well, and my company grew. I then got put on what was called trade missions, and these trade missions showcased the best of America to other countries. And I was, on 2 of them with Commerce Secretary Penny Pritzker, who became one of my favorite people in the world because of the way that she positioned what we do. So having the might of the American government, it was like the best sales and marketing ever. Because instead of me knocking on a door going, "Hey, we're here to help," it's like, no, we have these people on our trade mission to showcase the best of America, and you should take a listen to this. That opened up the Middle East. And to this day, I have a number of different organizations that I've created there, mostly out of Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and also with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So we've been responsible for an amazing growth of these mega, or what they're calling giga projects. I was a subject matter expert with McKinsey and Company and Boston Consulting in Riyadh in 2016. Spent some time there, and we created a document, a plan called Vision 2030 for the kingdom to wean themselves off petroleum into something else. And I was responsible for the chapter of the City of the Future, which they renamed NEOM. So, yeah, I'm part of that crowd. So I'm having a ball, Cody. Going from the humbleness of just being, a sole practitioner, advisor, consultant that just happened to stumble upon this thing called the internet, and then BIM. And now I'm into this world of smart cities with budgets that are embarrassing sometimes with the amount of zeros are after it. But that's not the important point. It's the impact that we're having on the people, right? Because you can spend a lot of money on stupid stuff, but just the fact that we are not afraid of big budgets and then being responsible for being able to take the schedule and the budget and making sure that these things really happen for real. Because when they happen for real, it affects from the weakest part of our society to the strongest. And that's the cool thing about doing these urban environments that have so many things that you have to think about. I mean, I have to think about things that don't exist yet and manage those. Case in point, we've been leading the autonomous vehicle world for years now. We've been very blessed with experimentation, that type of thing. And what I found is that with autonomous vehicles, there is no longer need for a street grid. It's not necessary, which means we can place our buildings where they're supposed to be. Meaning that the geography, the climate, all these things, if you really want to do renewables, doing renewables by putting up, even micro fans to collect the wind, it's very difficult, right? But if you can study how the wind comes in and off, like if it's a coastal type of urban project, on and off the sea, you can actually then place your buildings in a way that create wind tunnel, right? And be able to capture a lot of that breathing, we call it, right? The onshoring and the offshoring of the wind. And so we put up on our building envelope then micro fans, which then drive turbines, which creates power, right? Totally, better than those big, fans that usually kill a lot of birds, right? This is a smarter way now of placing your buildings into areas where allow the autonomous vehicle to find the shortest path, right? So our roads are much different than the roads that we're used to. We have no curbs. There's no need for it because the way that we design our roads is is how the flow of either rainwater, stormwater runoff, that type of thing is necessary. But usually those curbs originally were meant to keep the horse carriages from going off and up onto the sidewalk or cars in today's world. But if they're autonomous, they're completely safe. So there's no need for it. So the cities of the future are not meant to be looking like what you see in the movies like Blade Runner. It's gonna be something that we've never really immersed ourselves into, and I find that exciting. So
Are we more like the Jetsons in that regard?
no, 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 no. I've not seen a scenario, a movie, or a TV show that actually depicts how we're moving, except for some very, very clever studios I'm looking at, designers that are now designing the metaverse, where there's free expression. How do you take a world where there is no science, there's no physics, there's no gravity? And then what does that allow you to do? Why do you need certain things in gravity-based architecture? When you take that out, you're like, why do we need walls? Why do we need that floor? Here's a case in point. So there was a very cool movie, not as good as the book, called Ready Player One, right? And there's a scene in the movie where the two heroes go to a nightclub in the metaverse. And as they're in there, they walk into the big hall, and there's a bar, and there's gravity, and people are having fake drinks, but they're socializing, right? But suddenly, one of the heroes pulls the other hero onto the dance floor, and there's no floor because there's no gravity. And they do these funky dances and do all this stuff. Now, how can we learn from that design and push that back into the world that has physics and needs for safety, security, all that type of stuff? But what would happen if it would help us understand buildings better and then the interactions between the buildings? And what else can we do with that for these newer urban experiences? So we have a lot to learn from the virtual design space rather than just going save as with like a BIM, right? That Revit model works very, very well in real life. But once you put it into the metaverse, it could be a sucky experience, right? But we've never gone through that back and forth now, and we're now just starting to have those conversations. So I think we are going to be seeing things that, quite frankly, the science fiction writers have never even thought about yet because they don't do what we do, right? So, the visions of the future, like Blade Runner and other Ready Player One and stuff like that, I think that their imaginations are immature. I actually think Hollywood has done a disservice. Actually think the story writers have done a disservice to the public because all I know is that I don't want to live in Blade Runner. Do you want to live in Blade Runner? That's not the future. Yet you also don't go utopia, Jetsons, right? The truth is going to lie somewhere in between, but we are now responsible for our preferred future. Think about that. Designers are now responsible for a preferred future. So if that's the case, well, what is your preferred future? And why don't we get there? So that's the challenge that I'm faced with as our company, and how we can not so much make money, but again, provide maybe not all the answers, but provide enough of a conversation that I can hand off from my generation to the next generation and allow them to explore their world and design their own preferred future.
And talking about this concept of a metaverse, the way you see it, what is the metaverse and where are we at and where will we be going?
But right now, we have three terms that I think need clarification. Right. So, from building information modeling, in other words, 3D design, we're still publishing out 2D construction documents. It's like, just stick with AutoCAD, you were better at it. But anyway, as we start to move forward with three-dimensional construction documents, that's going to be driven by the fact that we don't have enough workers, right? Which means that we're going to have to do a lot more with a lot less, which means that the communication from the design intent to the constructors is going to need to be helped so that there's fewer mistakes. What we're looking at right now is also a bunch of people that are coming into the industry that are not English speakers in the U.S., especially south of the Mason-Dixon line. Right now, I thought I was being very clever by automatically having the English versions of what I was talking about in my drawings and specs be converted into Spanish. Right, very clever. I never really thought until I went out into the field that most of these people who are Spanish speakers can't read or write. They're illiterate. So this goes well beyond now any sort of language. So if the complexity is how do I communicate my design intent? Well, why not just put together work packages? Almost everyone on the job site has one of these. So those work packages now are little animations of do the work. You know, if you're a plumber, do it on this floor, and this is how it works. Show it in 3D and then animate it. And oh my goodness, you've broken down all the communication issues. Not all of them, but a big part of it. So I'm very bullish on this new way of communicating, and it will be done in 3D. As I'm starting to take a look at some of the newer hardwares, the fact that I can have 3D not just on a screen, but holographically popping up, that's in the next 5 years, right? Which will be just commonplace. Now all of a sudden we have the way of emancipating out of the authoring tools of construction documents, BIM, and moving it into a world of communication, gaming engines. So once we do that, there's a term called digital twin. Everything that is in reality is now also shown in the digital asset. The digital asset and the physical asset come together, the cyber physical relationship. This means that the digital twin is in the actual mirror of what's in reality. Once you pull that though into the gaming engine, you no longer have control over how people see the information. Because in a digital twin, like I mentioned, like work orders, it could be for a plumber, an electrician, a taper, a roofer, whatever it is. The, Before they come to the job site, they know exactly what needs to be done for that day, right? And what's really cool is that we could check that off onto the information model, and now all of a sudden we have a great schedule. So you see how schedules become 3D, right? Now, when we go into the world of no longer showing you and forcing you to go into what I want you to experience. When you pull that into a gaming engine, you've now created a virtual world, meaning that I can go anywhere I want and I can't stop you as the author. So you're creating these digital assets now that have even more, not only responsibility, but more chance for profit and for expanding out how people can interface with the digital world. What gets really interesting is when you start to take what really is in the real world, things like IoT. The Internet of Things has slowly been being put into every one of our buildings and residences, and we don't even know it. Just start with smart speakers. Things like Alexa and Echo, right from Amazon. That's an amazing piece of technology because it's starting to learn now my habits, how I do things. A famous author named Joe Pine, a dear friend of mine, coined it the genius platform. Your home, just by the interface of that smart speaker, is now starting to have an anticipated need relationship with you. It will learn that on every Tuesday, I have to drop my son off at his guitar lesson, and usually we pick up a pizza on the way home. Well, guess what? Everything's taken care of now with Alexa. She knows that I went to go pick up my son, knows what time that I'm going to be over at the pizzeria, and it's already paid it through my PayPal. So I literally come in, scoop up the pizza, come home. Convenience. That's what this thing is showing, and that's done through repeatability, that rhythm, the idea of large language models and machine learning that people are calling AI. That's the direction that we're going into genius platforms that are going to create this cyber physical relationship. Another example of IoT would be Ring, the doorbell ringer, right? I could be anywhere on planet Earth, and I know if someone's come and rang my bell. And because of the TV monitor on it, the small little camera, I can have a full-blown talk going, "Oh, yeah, you FedEx, it's okay. I'm away from the house, just, drop it. I don't need to sign for it." I mean, you can have an amazing experience of that cyber-physical relationship anywhere on planet Earth, the physical and the digital. This is where things get interesting, though. Nest is another one, a good thermometer for inside of your home and all that other stuff. That's also IoT, but these are all points of data, right? Now you put that into a virtual world and you can have a ball because now you can start to do scenarios. You can start to do simulations like my friend Richard Boyd has coined the term that we are in the simulation century. Everything is going to go through different ways of how can this situation go? No matter what the situation is, and you can now control it, you can look at it, you can experience it both digitally and physically, which leads us to the metaverse. So you have digital twins, it's just a mirror, virtual worlds that take you emancipated out of a piece of software and more into an experiential way of interfacing with your physical world. But the metaverse is going to be a promise that once it starts to come around, we're looking at it from the vantage point of singularity, meaning that you will become one seamlessly with the experience. So my two 13-year-old boys, actually my boy's 14 today, which is pretty nice. I thought that during COVID, it was going to be a really, really bad thing for their maturity, right? Because they go to public school. Right, and one thing about public school is, yeah, you get knowledge, and academic type of things, but half the experience is the social experience. Making friends, who the jerks are, who the good people are, all this other stuff, and you learn to adjust and adapt, right? I mean, that's and 6th grade, 7th grade, that's a big time, right? Because that's moving from elementary into middle school. I'm so old, it used to be called junior high school. I don't know what happened to that. But at the end of the day, when he then, started to, go back to school and be back to Boy Scout meetings and all these things, what I was worried about was that he would lose the social skills. He didn't, he excelled with the social skills. I should have listened to The Who, the rock band a little bit more because they had a great album called The Kids Are All Right. Guess what? The kids are all right. I shouldn't have stressed out as much because they seamlessly go from immersive type of experiences, either, using a Quest 2 and going into those experiences, or passively working with, the games that never end, things like Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft, all that type of stuff. And what I watch is that he still, has his friends and they kid each other. They have, talks, all those types of things in the virtual world that seamlessly happen in the physical world. It's like the game never stops to them, right? So they're the natives in this new world, and you and I are the immigrants, Cody. Quite frankly. So we have a lot to learn about what their preferred future is going to be, because they're redefining how the seamlessness of working in the singularity of not knowing the difference between a metaverse and the universe. And I think that is very special. It's also a double-edged sword. But at the end of the day, you try and keep the positivity and that angle on it, and amazing things can start to happen because now your experiences are much more immersive. You learning history, social studies at school now can be immersive. You just don't read about Napoleon. How about riding on a horse next to him? I mean, just look at where we're going with this, and that's what the metaverse promises to be, which are these immersive ways of of seamlessly coming in and out of a consciousness that allows us to do superhero things, right? So that's why, I'm very bullish on how this is going to happen. There will not be a major announcement on the 11 o'clock news that the metaverse is here. It's happening over time, right? And you will not be saying, "Oh, metaverse this, metaverse that." No, it's just part of experience. It's part of living, right? We don't go out there every day going, "Thank God for the universe." I mean, maybe some people that are into space do that every day, but for the most part, it's just there. It's like an element. And that's the exciting part about it, because how you interface with it are going to have multiple levels. I think we're going to be getting rid of mice and styluses and things like that, because right now the best way of interfacing with a metaverse environment is through avatars, representatives of yourself or what you want to be, right? And like in Ready Player One, you could be anything you wanted, right? I'm looking at the humanoid aspects of it, like in Ready Player One, where right now the majority of avatars look like really bad Donkey Kong pixelated whatevers, right? Um, but I'm watching what like Epic Games is doing with their MetaHuman Lab, where they're actually taking a humanoid approach by putting a GoPro camera up to yourself and you read off a script, and it will create a lifelike deep fake of you. If your nose crinkles when you smile or you get dimples or whatever it is, it's capturing everything. And again, repeatability, putting it into a machine, let that machine learn over time. it's starting now to look like you, act like you, but you can be anything you want. You know, you can be a Martian, you can be a dog or whatever, but it's going to have your characteristics, how you walk, your gait, all of these motion capture, not just reality capture, but motion capture, right? The really cool part about it and how it interfaces with the metaverse um, is experiments that we're doing now, and there's two of them. Number one, I read a script over a 6 to 7 day period, and it's a lot of different emotions. It starts to learn my decision making, which is interesting, right? So now my deep fake can actually be representative of me, so that when I'm not around, it takes over in the digital realm. That gets fun when you talk about, the gaming never ends. Well, a construction site never ends, right? It always goes, but the humans need time to rest. That's why it shuts down at night or doesn't completely shut down because it's still operating. Imagine a handoff to a group of stakeholders that have all the personalities, the decision-making skills, the ethics, the morals, all that stuff that goes into it that now interface in the digital world for things like reconciliation. Were there any recordable injuries, reportables, on the construction site, and then fill out the information, right, and send it to the insurance company. Are my deliveries on time for tomorrow morning? All that stuff that I usually do first thing in the morning physically gets taken care of by my avatar at night. So the construction site never ends, and that's how the metaverse will start to interface with my main medium, which are my avatars, which then take over the project. So yeah, we're having some fun. Sometimes as we go down certain rabbit holes, I've had spectacular failures, but that's how we learn so that we can actually then move it back in. So yeah, that's the way that we look at it, from digital twins being a mirror into virtual worlds that emancipates, the traditional notion of construction documents and digital assets, moving into the metaverse, which will be a singular experience. And I always have to remind myself that we're not just doing this. Excuse me. We're not just doing this for ourselves. Again, I'm designing for a generation that hasn't been born yet, because they're the ones that are inherit this legacy.
Which is a great lead into what Ralph has done with the BIM Coordinator Summit. I think there's a lot to be learned from that summit, from a lot of great minds from around the world each year. And I was very impressed by your presentation on unlocking the metaverse and what AI will make us. I thought we'd take a couple minutes just to talk about that presentation.
Sure. So, Ralph and I have been friends for many, many, many years. I'm actually Irish, so I think all my relatives are like the entire Irish population. It seems, just and we not only have the commonality of heritage and that type of thing, but also of work. And we've done some projects together. And I always find that his resources in reaching out from that tiny little island to create these communities of thought is just, I mean, he's doing a service that will be his legacy, for the global industry. Because what we do is we find commonalities about how work gets done. And I also think that we can celebrate the differences as well. One big difference outside of the US is that quantity surveyors really run the projects. There's not even the term quantity surveyors within the domestic US, right? But I think that those challenges and again, communicating the design intent to the constructors and then from the constructors to the operators of those buildings is changing this digital transformation. And that's why I think that the BIM Coordinator Summit is something that will continue because it's needed so that we can share what's going on out there. So I was sharing experiences on real world projects, some again that were spectacular failures because I don't shy away from those. I think that it's good to run out there and make mistakes. It's okay. As long as no one physically really gets hurt, right? But at the end of the day, what we're finding is that the way that we're starting to pull together all of these different components, and now that I'm sitting in the owner's seat, which is very interesting, rather than being a service provider, like a BIM coordinator, an architect, engineer, contractor, Um, my needs are different, which means that I need to get communication from the field that's accurate. Trust of the data is probably my biggest issue every day. Because if I start putting data that is not truthful, I'm building on a house of cards. So that's why, we're big sticklers for things like smart contracts, which is what we discussed in Dublin, about, understanding that when you are writing out a contract, which really runs the entire built environment, right? Everything's built on contracts. Usually they're either hand drawn sometimes, typed in, or they're PDFs that have fields, but the information going in there still isn't trusted, right? But what happens with a smart contract is that I can have a contract and one of the fields in there could be your name's Cody, my name's Paul. We both agree. When you say yes, it gets written into the software code, the actual code itself. So it's immutable. It's not a field that you can change information in and out, right? So that means that you trust that I'm Paul. I trust that you're Cody. Let's move to the next step. What address are you at? Blah, blah, blah. All these points of data become immutable, which means that they can be learned upon over time. So imagine every transaction that happens on any project now is captured and immutable. This is going to piss off a lot of the people that make money off the inefficiencies in our industry because this is ultimate transparency. But it also means I have trusted data. Now, what can you do with trusted data? Well, I can actually use tools like generative AI and stuff and really trust it. It's not something that's scraped off some website and God knows what it was, right? So, and that's why we have a lot of things in AI called hallucinations, right? Because you went down a rabbit hole. You trusted a piece of data, and then what happened, right? We are cautiously optimistic about how to build upon that because, again, the repeatability of project after project after project, everyone's trusting that data. Now, all of a sudden, we can actually get things like maybe accurate estimates for cost, accurate estimates for work getting done, schedules, and start to back into a higher quality built environment. And that's really where I think the essence of what we were discussing at Ralph's BIM Coordinator Summit. I think that's really where I was trying to provide that type of message. What I also like is and you had mentioned it about the different BIM heroes that show up, and it's the collective knowledge rather than just one person that actually makes it an ecosystem, which means that I can concentrate on things that are important to me and take the gems, those little gems from each one of these. But that may be a totally different map from your needs, but that's okay. That's why you have a large community. That's why you have different task forces and that type of thing, because this is a very, 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 very big deal. And people are just starting to realize, wow, this isn't about just making money for an association and having a bunch of members. This is really a community generated, member based, data driven organization. And it's a lot of fun. I think that, as market conditions change, as we do see the world come even closer, organizations like the BIM Coordinators Summit, and those events, I think, are gonna be, highlights of people's years, as things move forward.
Yeah, another great community that I'm a part of, and I know that you're involved in is reality capture. We have the reality capture network with Matt and what they're trying to do on that front. Um, Talk a little bit about where you see reality capture coming into play. We talked a little bit about Google Earth and that experience and how that will impact the move.
Oh my goodness. The reality capture, because we have a lot more in place, assets out there than we do coming up out of the ground, right? So it's almost easy to do it's easier to do a reality capture of things as they're going into place. I see a lot of very, very good best practices coming out of, like, let's say, healthcare. Before you close up the wall, do a reality capture what's in behind the wall. Where are those oxygen tanks so that you're not, you know, hanging a picture there and you're putting a nail through an oxygen tube. All these different things that happen now can be created as a transparency. And that's very, very cool because now all of a sudden I could look at layers of data based upon what my needs are for that moment. So that's the easier part. Collecting what's there now. What you're collecting is the skin, right? It's almost like dating a mannequin. She may look good, but it's not going to be a good conversation, you know. So that's where, I think that the challenge of the reality capture market right now, is that there's a lack of standards, right? If you go out there and get a LiDAR machine, you could put a shingle out tomorrow and all of a sudden you're a reality capture specialist, right? Yet, how does it really go like scan to BIM? I love that term because it doesn't exist. But they say scan to BIM. They're probably hosting like about 10,000 people in India that are actually cleaning all that shit up. Okay. That's the reality. That's the reality of reality capture, to, scan to BIM. But doing point clouds and then getting them into a position to geolocate things, the next step is what I was talking about before with the Internet of Things, all those data points, all those pieces of hardware out there, like CCTV cameras and all this type of stuff. They're now geopositioning the Z axis for the first time because everything's always been done in plan, right? Even your evacuation plans in an elevator lobby, right? It's still in 2D, and if there's a fire, and you don't understand 2D, what are you doing? You know? Um, by the way, that's the next big thing is converting all of those 2D photocopied, in half by 11 plans. You are here. Don't take the elevator when it fires. It'll be done in 3D, hopefully holographically coming out. So you'll actually know how to go, and there will be holographic diodes that will guide you so that you follow the yellow brick road. That will happen. But that's part of the charm of reality capture is we need that in order to do those cool things, right? It's the baseline, but it's only the geometry. But now we have a Z axis. So now all of a sudden I have the ability to not just see where the fire extinguisher is, the location in plan. I can actually see it in 3D. This is the promise of what's called spatial computing. And that's where the metaverse takes off. That idea of singularity, of moving from one phase to another, not even blinking an eye, is going to be based upon those data points and how you can move through digitally and physically through space. And reality capture, as you mentioned, Matthew Bird, a good gentleman who's really taking up the torch here by creating the reality capture network, which they're having their big conference in, I believe, next week in Boise, Idaho. So I can't wait to be out there because I'm a huge enthusiast of reality capture done right. The reality capture network is trying to set those internal standards because we hear stories all the time about large scale organizations, airports that have been going through 3 iterations of reality capture because the first 2 screwed up. There's going to come a time where the market just says, screw you. We want to have a reputable group. And you might find engineers finding a new revenue stream because these machines are really easy to work, right? But the standard is, where do you place them? And how do you really capture things properly? And then verify. That is a professionalism. It almost means that there should be like a certificate program, and or an education program. Something says that you've been trained properly. And if you see that good housekeeping seal of approval, you should hire those people to do your airport because you only do it once, right? But that's the growing pains right now. The machinery is lowering in cost every year. They're becoming more sophisticated every year. I mean, anyone with an iPhone 12 or above already has LiDAR built into this. It's the measurement tool. Try it. It's right there, right? So now there's apps that I'm seeing that use the phone and you can scan a room within seconds and get a pretty accurate beginning part of a geometry model, which then needs, of course, tender loving care of a professional so that you're actually putting things properly around it. So again, it's a part of a process, but I find that the reality capture is now also seeing an opportunity to go hyper growth. By reality capture does things that are static, that don't move. Where we're starting to see where the real money is in motion capture. You start to see that anyone that has a Tesla will attest to that. It's so cool to see at least the outlines of other cars that are on your right-hand side, right? That become a second set of eyes. But the motion capture over time is fascinating to me because then you can actually create right businesses. And here's a for instance. So I was part of a team that put together the design for the Expo 2020 in Dubai, the World's Fair. Um, we're right now rethinking what that neighborhood is going to be. Originally, we had it planned that the legacy, because when you have all the pavilions of all the different countries at the World's Fair, at the end of the World's Fair, there's a certain amount of years where the only pavilion that's allowed to stay is the host country. Everything else has to be knocked down, which means we have a white canvas with a lot of infrastructure there. So, boom, you have an instant city, right? Originally, we were going to make it like a maker's village, which is kind of cool. But after COVID, we rethought things because the government of China decided that they wanted to go digital currency, but not crypto, because they wanted control. Because crypto is decentralized, and you don't do that to a communist party. They want everything centralized, they want control. So they created their own type of currency called central bank digital currency, CBDC. Um, and so December of 2021, they banned all crypto. Why? Because it would compete against their currency. 90% of all the crypto mining happened within the borders of China, and they just banned it. Now you have, dislocated, miners that are looking anywhere so that they can mine, and you can see crypto still growing. Yeah. So, what we decided to do was that in addition to being a maker's village, Dubai right now is heaven for any expat. If you've got kids or not, it has everything. It's got, great schools, great environment, no crime. Just it's a perfect environment for people that want to live not in their own country, but still survive and have a great experience. So what we're doing is we're making the world's largest mining for crypto will be right there. Now, this is cool, right? So that means that I needed to find data centers. And how are you going to do that? And what a lot of people don't know is that 3 weeks ago, Dubai just launched their first nuclear power plant reactor. Dubai. Why? Because Dubai has no oil, has no natural gas. That's Abu Dhabi. And their power needs are increasing. So they went clean, renewable nuclear. The first new nuclear plant in like 25 years or something crazy like that. They have more power than they need, which I just solved my problem about cooling, right? Except I went to Dell Computer and they put me in touch with their edge computing group because I went right to the data center group, right? Because they're the number one computers in the world for racking and all that stuff in the data center. And I wanted the best. But I also wanted to not just use the power for using power's sake, where there are different ways of thinking things through. So I got guided to one of their newer data centers is in Bahrain. And in Bahrain, they have the equivalent of what they created. It was like a bathtub, right? So that when they stuck their racks of computers, um, they were submerging them into this synthetic type of fluid that cooled the computers by 80%. I'm like, that's cool. I want that. I want to do that. They said, no, you don't want to do that. There's a better way of doing it. And they heard some of my talks about the work that we do with edge computing, where we can take components of computers and actually integrate them into the building themselves. So we've done that for security, we've done that for safety, and had a lot of fun with it. You usually working with first responders and groups like that. But she said, you know, at Dell Computer, she said you may want to take a different look at it because we work very closely with the military. So they have ruggedized, components, hard drives, all these other things, because they're in harsh conditions, theaters of war and all this stuff. She said, why don't you work with our team? So we did. And what we came up with was ruggedized for the military components of a computer that when you put it onto the extreme facades of my buildings, it actually becomes a server. The building is a server, which means my cooling goes to zero because it's just a building, right? And since most data remains stagnant, it's the deltas of change that need to be communicated. So the buildings themselves are static racks, right? But here's where the really cool stuff comes in with spatial computing and the movement of data. So we've had discussions with Tesla about this idea, right? And they said, well, we look at our automobiles not as cars, but as computers that have wheels. And that's pretty true if you've ever driven them. So I said, well, okay, what are you seeing here? Well, with the reality capture that we have for static, that's easy, but motion capture is about movement. What we're doing is we're enabling the owners of Tesla to make money because when they go into our neighborhood, it's going to say, listen, Cody, your Tesla is only using, 8% of its power right now. Would you mind if we took 92%, the remaining 90% and make your computer as part of the ecosystem for the time that you're here? And we will pay you X. Huh. Now, all of a sudden, I got moving motion capture information dealing with static information inside of a built environment. That's cool. That's the way that we're heading. That, again, buildings becoming computers finally, and then the interaction that we have ecosystems that can swell and dissipate depending on which cars are in there. Yeah, there's a strong future for identifying what that means because I need motion capture in order for that to work. So again, the world of reality capture is being tested every day. Lack of standards, which is fast becoming standards. Um, Best practices and the exchange of that information is very, very powerful. And then number three, the explosive growth of technology in a spatial computing environment has to have a mix of motion capture and reality capture.
Which leads me to another great question, which is the integration of the metaverse into AR, MR, VR, XR. One of the coolest things that I did, and it was just a couple years ago, was in the virtual reality space. I was with a friend of mine and huge Knicks fan. And there's this thing that came out, I think it was around right after COVID. You couldn't go and watch, the sport in person. But what they found out is if they could put a device in the arena courtside and cameras in each direction, they could actually allow you to watch the sport in a completely different way. Where, you go to a sport and you're limited to the view that you're sitting in, or you watch it on television and you're only limited to the views that the broadcast actually provides you. In this particular experience, it allowed you to be on the court, behind the net, up in the concourse, you name it. It puts you everywhere that you wanted to be at any point, at any time to your liking. How do we take that and now implement that into the greater scheme of
Oh, just follow the money. Okay, so um, we did a project in Dubai at the Burj Al Arab. That's that hotel that looks like a sailing ship. But up on top, there's this really cool heliport pad that comes out. So we designed it for a boxing match between Floyd Mayweather and the Arab top boxer. And it was meant to be an exhibition. We put up uh, almost like bleachers, but done very, very nice with like, super duper, sofa type of seating. And those were going for $1 million a piece. And we had 80 of them. Okay. But we did a metaverse of it and actually had on Floyd Mayweather and the other boxer certain diodes so that we were able to capture the movement with almost zero latency from what was happening live to being broadcast out on the net. To your point, exactly what and we learned from the MBA. One of the coolest things that we were able to do was make money, more money, off of virtual seating than we ever could with the 80. So that was $80 million in revenue, right? That's just step one. What we did though was that we then allowed people to populate wherever they wanted to sit for $10. And we were right, our sales and our estimates were upwards of 200,000, right? Tokenomics, follow the money, because now all of a sudden you can sell a lot more in quantity with a lower price to get more viewers and all that type of stuff. The boxers love it. The crowd loves it that's there. And, at the end of the day, we were shooting for a 60 million person deal. Uh, Unfortunately, one of the leaders in the UAE passed away the day before this event was supposed to be held. It got postponed. The Burj Al Arab was not available, so they held it in in Abu Dhabi, and it actually went off, but not with the numbers that we were looking for. Again, not a spectacular failure, but that was like almost famous right there. But that promise then is now going into esports, where we are designing in Rabat, Morocco, the capital, an esports city. In Rabat, Morocco, the capital, we're putting it an esports city. And in that, we're designing the first of its kind esports arena. Now, in every sport in the world, if it's an emerging sport, it usually plays in a stadium or an arena of the previous big sport. So in the case of the NFL, up until about 25 years ago, many, many teams played in the baseball outfields of stadiums. But then as the NFL matured, now you have the NFL stadiums. But as Major League Soccer kept going, they use the NFL stadiums, but the crowds aren't as large. So they created their own MLS studios, stadiums. Same thing with esports. It's using NHL and NBA arenas. But here's the problem. And I've been to a number of these now. They're 3-day tournaments, 20,000 people, crazy. It's like a big party every, every year. And they do it for Fortnite, League of Legends, World of Warcraft, whatever that thing is, and and they host it. The cool part about it is that usually these 5-person esports teams are led by an influencer, right? And they have a large following, like Ninja, someone like that, with Fortnite. And then they create like these all-star teams that surround the one influencer. And because they're so intense when it comes to their followers and whatnot, they usually buy their tickets together, which means they can take up like section 101 courtside, right? But what happens if Ninja loses the first day? They all leave and it's empty for the next 2 days. Why? Because of security, all that type of stuff, right? Safety. So what we devised was saying, well, those 3 bad Star Wars movies, that's one with Jar Jar Binks, and no one likes that guy. But there's certain scenes like in the Senate when he goes to speak and his section floats down and then it goes back again once he's done talking, right? So we decided, and we're still experimenting with this, but my relationship uh, with Thornton Tomasetti, the one of the best structural engineers in the world, they have this special lab called the Kinetic Building Lab. And what they're doing is that uh, they're creating for me the ability for hydraulics that if that section 101 is empty, it moves back up to the top and then the next section comes down filled with people. So it's going to be a totally moving kinetic interior experience that's going to blow people's minds. But that's what we're calling an esports arena. Now what we're doing is doubling down on that and saying, not only physically are you going to be moving, but what would happen if now we do exactly what we did with Floyd Mayweather, that no matter where you sit, it can be immersive, it can be augmented, right? Any way that you want to be in this thing, here's your NFL Sunday ticket, right? You can go to this tournament, sit up in nosebleeds, sit down, be sitting next to Ninja, do whatever you want, but it's going to cost you. So the more experiences you want, well, that's the world of tokenomics. But we expect that with the amount of followers, especially the ones that watch these esports shows, from South Korea and other places where it's very, very popular. Um, I believe the last World Series of Fortnite, which was held at the U.S. Tennis Center in Flushing Meadows, Queens, Arthur Ashe Stadium. I believe there were 64 million people watching that 3-day tournament, right? And if every one of those pays $10, there you go. So yeah, what you were experimenting with and seeing through the NBA 2K experience, that is putting down the beginning parts of tokenomics. Follow the money because this is going to be bigger than we ever thought.
No doubt. And I think one of my favorite games in the world is Assassin's Creed,
There
right?
you go.
And, the world, game engine that you were talking about and the world building that they've done in that. How do you think that all those different concepts that we just talked about will relate to the built environment for architecture, engineering, and construction?
Well, I think it's going to directly affect the design, like what we're doing with esports arena, right? Like we have to think differently. We have to think like gamers. Quite frankly, we have to start talking like gamers. Uh, so I had mentioned before about doing deep fakes and having my being, my humanoid avatar, uh, help control certain situations when I'm physically not there. Um, I think one of the big breakthroughs, and I know two different companies that are trying this, is to create non-player characters, NPCs, and those non-player characters, for those that don't game, are those characters like in Assassin's Creed or World of Warcraft where you have lots and lots and lots of people. Um, but it could be like 5,000 people in that scene, but there could be maybe like three people behind some of those characters, right? So the NPC part of this is really interesting from the standpoint that um, we're looking at them as subject matter experts. Right? They're in the game, construction or design, right, or facility management, but they're always there as the experts. So this means that you're democratizing design. You're democratizing construction, where it's not just those subject matter experts, one that may have done, like, let's say libraries. Maybe you've done 10 libraries in your architectural career. My subject matter expert knows every library on the face of the planet Earth, who designed it, best practices, how things operate, how it works, what's the best design from every library. Now that becomes a very valuable NPC, right? Because now it becomes part of my theater, my project, and I can either rent that NPC or buy it, right? So lease or buy, right? And that means that I can compete as a sole practitioner for that library project because I got the number one librarian, designer, and or constructor in the world, right? So now all of a sudden, again, that's the democratization. Imagine that for every single component of the built environment. And because you have to be in a metaverse environment, again, the avatars and NPCs are going to be your communications tool. It's your channel about how you can actually do things like that. But yeah, I know two groups that are going about that. One is going through the building product manufacturers, where it's the big thing for years, centuries, has literally like the 1800s to now, is this publication called Suites. It used to be with McGraw Hill. Suites is a combination of every single building product manufacturer and all of their brochures, and they come in this like big case, and it's put into CSI master format, so it's like a library, well, back in the day, it was Division 8 was doors and windows. That's where I could find my Anderson windows and whatever, and you always knew where the information was. Imagine that now being put into a virtual environment where it's not just taking a look at a catalog number and maybe like a picture, right? But you can actually experience it and understand, how does this Anderson window work with this type of wall system? Well, you can do that now. And I think that's gonna be really special for access to that type of data that's accurate, trusted, yada, yada, yada. And these are gonna be the big winners, these are gonna be the next unicorns inside of the built environment. Why? Because it makes our life easier. And a lot of it's gonna be AI driven. Again, like what Joe Pine writes about, the genius platform. We're just starting to see that now with, Siri and Alexa. But what happens when Siri and Alexa get actually put into the walls, floors, and ceilings of every building? So here's a scenario. What we're looking at right now, especially in the world of AR, XR, VR, is that's a level of experience. One is immersive, one is like you're looking through like a magic mirror, right? Um, but if you then take everything I just said about spatial computing and say, huh, what would happen if we had gave personality to our buildings? Because right now, you can change the person that's talking to you as Alexa and make it a proper Australian, or a proper, British guy or whatever. You can customize that, and it just becomes part of your lifestyle, right? Like, you don't even think about it, you know? Um, but what would happen if we could actually take that type of technology and give personalities to building types? Like a storage warehouse. Storage warehouse is kinda like an introvert, right? Not a lot of stuff goes on, not a lot of people in and out, as opposed to like a high performance laboratory on a college campus. Man, there's experiments going on, it's crazy, people coming in and out, it's crazy. That's like an extrovert, that's like a valley girl, like, "Oh my god," right? And put that type of voice to it. Or what would happen if it was a classroom, right? That's kind of like a old British guy, isn't it? And you'd expect like a British accent because not all this stuff changes, but lots of people coming in and out. Right? So we can actually give personalities to buildings so that instead of getting an alert on your phone that there's something wrong with your building, what would have happened if the building gave you a phone call and said, "Man, I don't know, man. This is building number 2. I'm not feeling too well today. I think my air filter on floor number 2 up in the plenum needs to be changed." Oh, that's okay. I'm sorry. I'll send someone over right away. Thank you. Having a relationship with your built environment is that next step. Everything's in place. The spatial computing, the smart speaker maturity, and understanding its own data so that the Genius platform will anticipate what the building needs are and your needs of that building. So yeah, we're like that one step away from that next generation where, you're no longer designing space, you're actually designing a personality.
Yeah. I think that's the great part of it. We talked a little bit about the historical education factor of the metaverse where you could go and live history, which I think is a major part of why people don't like history because they don't get to experience history other than, looking at a book, but physically getting you into that. If you could do that with buildings, I think that goes off, how we went from the pyramids to, till now, how does that look and how we got there? To the next part of it, like you talked about, is actually dreaming up the next built environment for a client. And then finally, at the end, how do you maintain it? Talk a little bit about, that process as a whole and how
Well,
metaverse comes in.
I think that the metaverse is going to be not just that new medium, but a new medium that allows storytelling. With storytelling, we can do a lot of things. So one of my big challenges with doing greenfield cities is that the city is being built without any sort of past. In other words, a lot of cities over time grew because it was a trading post, right? It could be on the water, by a river on the coast. There's others like, Dallas that are literally equidistant away from, horse raising and cow, raising farms and that type of thing, and being able to get it onto a train. So it became like Chicago, a place for slaughter, right? And the city grew up from that. Um, that contextualization is a big deal, right? Because if you think of what have been the pop-up cities that people really enjoy that need to be maintained over time, and I point to Disneyland, but there's nothing there. It's all fake, right? But truthful storytelling is something that needs to come out that people feel that it's authentic. It's not a stage set, right? And I'm taking a look at some of the smart cities that I've been to around the world, and they just feel not authentic. They feel plastic, mannequin, right? Looks good on the outside, but don't look behind that door. Um, so that authentic quality really comes down to human-centric design, and understanding what the needs are for that particular community on that point of planet Earth, so that we're not building stage sets, so that we're not building something that looks like a pop-up city, although it is. But how do you build that in? And what I'm learning through things like this new medium of virtual worlds leading towards the beginning pieces of the metaverse. Um, is that storytelling can be amplified, not so much shoved down your throat, but it can be amplified, meaning that humans, whenever you go into a certain place, like to congregate. You know, in my case, with my family, we always have Sunday dinner. It's a place to exchange what happened during the week, because everyone's crazy, during the week. It's a great way of just hearing people out. You having trouble, or successes, celebrations, things like that. And really, what it comes down to is that those celebrations over time become traditions. Those traditions over time become mythology, and those mythologies become legends. That's why the great cities of the world are not just one thing. They're a collection of neighborhoods, and that gives it its authenticity because it could be Little Italy. It could be going into a place like Chinatown and get authentic food, authentic smells, places from the old country, right? We're building that into every one of our smart cities. That idea of the contextualization of that particular place on planet Earth and celebrate those things. In the case of Neom, they're right in the middle of where all of the nomadic, uh, you know, uh, uh, crossroads happened throughout the Middle East, um, and the Bedouin lifestyle. Well, there was some very, very amazing things that they learned by sleeping under the stars, 1,001 Arabian Nights, and just all that, romantic type of thing leading into today's world. And so, how do you tell a story and have people buy into it and feel like it's their story so that they can create their own traditions and mythologies and legends over time? So, I work very closely with cultural anthropologists when we design the built environment. They're also now helping me with the digital built environment about how to build in those stories so that they're not just like a marketing piece, like "Come live in Neon." No, 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 no. No. It's you wanna live in Neon because you just experience these things. TV shows, movies, media is very, very powerful, which means that TV and movies are also morphing into something different, right? Just look at The Mandalorian on Disney Plus. That looked like a featured movie, yet they didn't have that budget. How'd they do it? Technology and digital transformation. They used millions of microscopic LED and created these screens 270 degrees concave along with a ceiling that would provide light, which meant that you could actually get reflection and shadow and capture it right away instead of doing a green screen, having to do CGI and all that post production. So really, really interesting ways of how we can look at other industries, see how they're doing their storytelling and improving themselves. We need now to do that because part of our storytelling is how do you build a building? What's your design intent? That's a conversation. That's storytelling. Well, let's start capturing that and amplify what this is really mean because there's certain people that would go into certain buildings, and you don't know why, but it feels comfortable. You want to be there, right? There's other spaces you go into, it's like, "Ugh, I don't wanna go down that hallway. It feels wrong." Well, let's learn about that because that's actually my job is to sell spatial experiences and be able to have people feel like they're inspired, quite frankly. I think we have a lot to learn from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s here in the US when we thought going into urban environments, the best thing to do is to stick people in towers. Man, all you do is just isolate them more, and that's why we had the projects, right? How'd that work out for us? Right? So by reimagining how that can be, we use tools as storytelling mechanisms, and the metaverse is gonna be one of the best amplification tools to do that because, again, you can make it like these things called the volume, these studios, right? And really have people immersed into those worlds. But for the most part, I hope that we never ever get to a Ready Player One immersive, that the reality is so bad we want to escape. We've done a really bad job if we get to that level. But I think, the antithesis of that is you want to use the the comfort of that storytelling world that may make life just a little easier. And that is an amplification rather than I'm immersed in it because I want escapism.
Which is the great lead into the final question I have for you, which is what does the future of the metaverse look like?
I don't think we're going to be going into the metaverse. I think the metaverse becomes something that is so natural. It becomes an element of what we experience as human beings. Again, that whole idea of the breadcrumbs we're starting to see, which turn into cow paths of, my sons in the gaming world and how seamlessly they keep their relationships and learn social skills and that type of thing into the real world. Um, I can imagine their kids just going that one step further, where, we don't have wearables. You walk into a space and the space itself understands you, understands, what's around you, what the situation is at that moment in time on planet Earth, and provides you an experience. And it's not something that's scripted, right? This can't be scripted. This is a natural evolution of how AI can help the human experience and the human condition be better. I'm a huge believer that the metaverse is just the construct uh, for a spatial computing experience. But where the real value is going to happen is in the world of blockchain, AI, and whatever that next thing is, because those are the things that drive experience. That's the data flow in to provide a human-centric solution, right? So that means that as we're moving forward, the transparency of the technology goes into the background, that the experiences that pop out from that hopefully will be a positive outcome. So yeah, it's one of these things where people are saying, "Oh, the metaverse, you're going to have to wear something," and then you go into this escape route. No, that's not quite it. Are we looking at different ways of how things are projected? Yeah, I think so. I think that information experiences that surround us, that help us, that understand that things like AI will make us better humans over time. Why? Because it takes care of the mundane. AI's greatest use is to use with AI because it checks itself. And which means that it's doing the right thing. It's taking care of all the mundane stuff that we don't have to deal with so that you and I can have a higher level conversation, Cody. I mean, that's really where, I'm seeing how AI is going to make us more human.
I want to thank you, Paul, for joining me on the BIM Heroes podcast.
It's my pleasure, Cody. And just with all of your listeners, um, I think the biggest thing that I'm learning is that I've been through waves and waves and waves of technological jumps, right? The latest one, of course, is, this idea of AI, but as it floats through spatial computing is where I think we're going to see its greatest value, at least in our generation. But, I bound out of bed every morning uh, for two reasons. Number one, there's only three things that humans need to survive and exist on planet Earth, and that's fresh water, safe food, and shelter. So everything we do every day is that we're helping the human species exist. That is a responsibility, and it's a noble cause. So everyone that is involved with the built environment, in whatever role you're doing, you should walk around with pride that we're doing something that is really, 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 really important and it's cool. Um, but the second thing is, in order to enable that type of inspiration, I think in business we need to say the word love more. And it's not the romantic love that causes Me Too situations. It's more of like love thyself, love your colleague, love what you do, and have pride in that. So, with anything else that can, which is going to emerge because it always does, technologically and everything else. I hope we do it with love in our hearts. And so with that, I loved being on your show, Cody.
Thank you, Paul, for joining us.